You know, usually when we start one of these deep dives, we're looking at a specific event, maybe a piece of new technology.
Hmm.
But today we are looking at a system, and frankly, the best description of the system came from one of our sources who didn't call it a sports league. They called it formulas of higher football mathematics.
It's a perfect description. It really is. We're looking at Belgium today, and, if you follow European news at all, it's famous for having incredibly complex politics.
Right.
But the research we've seen suggests their football league is actually trying to outdo the government for sheer complexity.
It really is. I spent most of the weekend just going through these articles and regulations, and we're not just talking about offside rules here.
No.
We are unpacking a league structure that involves, like, having points mid-season, wiping them to zero for other teams, linguistic borders that physically split the lower leagues, and a shattered economy in the amateur ranks that reads like a subplot from a crime novel.
It is a complete labyrinth. But what makes this so compelling, what makes this deep dive so interesting, is the paradox right at the center of it all.
Yeah.
Despite all this chaos, or maybe, as some of the sources argue, because of it, Belgium manages to stay incredibly relevant on the world stage.
Yeah.
They're sitting, what, 8th in the UEFA coefficients right now?
Exactly. They are punching way above their weight class, outperforming much bigger countries. So our mission today is to decode this higher mathematics. We need to figure out how this chaotic machine actually works, starting at the top with the Jupiler Pro League, and then going all the way down into the wild west of the amateur leagues.
And we should probably warn you, do not try to apply standard logic to what we are about to discuss.
Absolutely not. Okay, so let's start at the top. Jupiler Pro League. On paper, the regular season, it looks totally normal.
Right.
You've got 16 teams. They play 30 games. You know, if this were the Premier League or the Bundesliga, you'd stop right there, count the points, hand out the trophy. Simple.
Exactly. That's the traditional model.
Yeah.
But in Belgium, Game 30 is just the end of Act 1. The league basically takes a cleaver to the table and splits it into 3 completely separate branches.
This is the part where I had to, like, reread the notes a few times. Let's talk about the championship group. This is the top 6 teams.
The title fight.
But before they even kick a ball in these playoffs, the league takes their point totals from the whole regular season and divides them by 2.
It's a massive intervention.
Yeah.
Just huge. You could have dominated the entire season, finished 10 points clear of second place, and then suddenly, with the stroke of a pen, your lead is cut to 5.
You're just manufacturing a title race.
Completely, even if a team is running away with it.
But the detail that really got me was the rounding rule. Because obviously, if you have an odd number of points, say 61, you can't have 30.5 points, so they round you up.
They do. But the sources describe this as a kind of poisoned chalice. That free half point, it actually hurts you later in a tiebreaker. If you finish the playoffs tied on points with a team that didn't get that rounding up, you automatically lose. You're ranked lower because you get that little artificial boost at the start.
Wow. So you're literally doing algebra before you even think about your starting 11. And that's just the top 6. The middle of the table places 7 through 14. That's where it gets even stranger. The Europe playoffs.
This is just a fascinating mechanism. In the championship group, they have the points. Here, for these mid-table teams, they wipe the points entirely.
Because 0.
To 0, a complete factory reset.
That's wild. So you could have finished 7th, miles ahead of the team in 14th, and boom, you're on equal footing. They split them into 2 little groups of 4 for a mini tournament. But the winner of that bracket doesn't even get the European ticket, do they?
No, that would be far too simple. The winner of the Europe playoff bracket, they just earn the right to play a final boss battle.
A boss battle.
They have to play a one-off match against the team that finished 4th in the championship group. Only if they win that game do they get the spot in Europe.
It's like a video game where you beat the level, but then you have to fight the boss's older brother to actually win anything.
That's a great analogy, and the intention is pretty clear, right? They want to keep the season alive for as many teams as possible for as long as possible.
Which brings us to the bottom of the pile, the relegation dogfight. The bottom 2 teams, this isn't just, lowest points drops. They play each other 5 times.
Effectively, yeah. Look like a best-of-5 series, but not quite. They play their regular games, and then in this playoff, they face off multiple times. And the team that finished second to last, they start this mini-league with a 3-point head start.
And even if you survive that marathon, you're still not safe. The winner of that dogfight then has to enter another playoff against teams from the second division. It just sounds exhausting.
It is. But if you look at the why, why design a system that needs a flowchart to explain? The answer is money and engagement. The sources are really clear about this. Before this system, Belgium was ranked 14th in Europe. Now they're 8th.
It's all about killing the dead rubber, isn't it? Those pointless games at the end of the season.
Exactly. In a normal league, by April, half the teams are mentally on the beach. In this system, almost everyone has something to play for right up to the very last week. And that means high-stakes games.
Which means better TV ratings, more ticket sales, more revenue.
And it creates this specific kind of competitiveness. There was a comparison in the research to the Dutch Eredivisie. The Dutch league is very stable, but it's dominated by the big three: Ajax, PSV, Feyenoord. It's predictable.
Whereas the Belgian league is just volatile. Upsets happen all the time because the pressure is always on. And the sources note that the big 5 clubs in Belgium, they actually get a double vote on the league board. They keep the system in place because, well, despite the fans complaining, it keeps the money flowing. So it's a structure basically designed to manufacture drama. But as we move down the ladder, the complexity shifts from being, mathematical to being political. This was a really interesting pivot in the materials.
This is where the sport really starts to mirror the state. When you drop down to National 1, that's the 3rd tier, the league physically splits based on language.
You've got the VFV for the Dutch-speaking Flemish clubs and the ACFF for the French-speaking ones.
It's a literal linguistic border running through the fixture list.
And it gets even more granular, right? The sources highlight this Brabant anomaly. In the Brabant province, since 2016, only the very top provincial level is unified. Below that, if you're a club, you are segregated by language.
Which creates this really bizarre situation in Brussels.
Yeah, because Brussels is officially bilingual. So if I start a football club in Brussels, I have to. What? Choose a side.
You have to make a language choice.
Yeah.
You vote on which wing to join. And the data shows this is almost entirely political, not practical. The vast, vast majority of Brussels clubs choose to align with the French-speaking ACFF, no matter who's actually playing for them.
It's amazing how those fault lines exist even in amateur sports. But speaking of amateur sports, I want to get to what I think is the most substantial and, frankly, shocking part of this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We've looked at the structure. Now we need to look at the economy, specifically the shadow economy.
This is where we leave higher mathematics and we enter the Wild West. We're talking about the lower divisions, D1 to D3 amateur.
Now, the word amateur usually implies, people playing for the love of the game. Maybe you get a free beer after the match.
Right.
But the financials described in these articles are anything but amateur.
Not at all. The sources are pretty clear that players in these lower leagues are taking home significant monthly incomes. We are talking net earnings of, say, 1,000 to 3,000 euros a month.
Which is a full-time salary for a lot of people. But the key here is, because these are quote-unquote amateur clubs, that money isn't usually running through a payroll department.
No, it's coming under the table.
It's
black money. And we aren't talking about a few euros for gas. This is a systemic, cash-based economy.
One of the most vivid stories in the research was about the patron, the wealthy local guy who funds the club. There was this anecdote about a lawyer who was a club president.
Oh, that story. It perfectly encapsulates this whole world.
Huh.
This lawyer would come to the club every Thursday night carrying a suitcase full of cash to pay the players.
It's so brazen, just walking in with a briefcase on a Thursday.
Until, inevitably he got robbed. Some guys on mopeds knew the routine, they knew what was in the bag, and they just intercepted him. After that, he stopped bringing the cash to the club.
So what happened?
The players had to go to his private house to pick up their envelopes.
It feels like a scene from The Sopranos, not a local sports club. But It makes you wonder, where's all this money coming from? A small local club can't generate $3,000 a month per player just from selling tickets.
And that brings us to the sponsorship kickback scheme. It's essentially a form of money laundering. A sponsor, let's say it's a local construction company, they get an invoice from the club for, say, 200,000 euros.
Okay, so they pay that officially bank transfer.
Correct. The club keeps maybe 100,000 for legitimate expenses, lights, pitch maintenance, whatever. But they withdraw the other 100,000 in cash and hand it straight back to the sponsor under the table.
So the sponsor gets a tax deduction for the full 200,000, but they get half their money back in untraceable cash. And the club gets this huge stash of clean money to pay players illicitly.
Everybody wins, except, the tax man. And here's the real twist. The players often demand this arrangement.
That was the detail that really surprised me. You'd think players would want a proper contract, for security. But the sources mention players demanding a €3,000 signing bonus just to put pen to paper, and specifically refusing declared salaries.
Because a lot of them are collecting unemployment benefits. If they accept a declared salary, they lose their government checks. This way, they get the state benefits plus the tax-free football salary.
It's a double dip.
Yeah.
And that creates this massive distortion in the market. I was reading about a club, Royal Louvière, that tried to do things by the book.
Yes, this is the case of the honest fool, so to speak. The owner was an entrepreneur, a former pro. He wanted to run a clean ship, declared all the salaries, paid all the Social Security.
And he basically got punished for it.
He couldn't recruit. Players just refused to sign with him. They told him to his face, if you pay me officially, I lose money. Being honest became a massive competitive disadvantage. He's offering legitimate contracts, and players are walking away to go to a club that'll hand them an envelope.
It really shows how deep the rot goes, but it gets darker than just tax evasion.
Well,
When you have this much black money floating around, you invite a very different class of bad actors.
you open the door to match fixing. The sources detail a really chilling account from one player who was in a title-deciding match. He was approached by some intermediaries who told him to lift his foot, basically, to underperform.
And when he refused,
The threats got personal. They told him, we know where you live. We know where your children go to school. These weren't just passionate fans. These were criminal syndicates involved in betting.
that's the omerta the sources talk about, that code of silence. It explains why the authorities have had such a hard time cracking this. You can't audit a threat made in a parking lot.
Exactly. One prosecutor mentioned having to use wiretaps just to figure out what the actual market rate for a striker in the third division was, because all the contracts were just fiction.
However, it seems like the landscape is shifting. The sources point to this 2023 financial reform as a potential turning point.
This is the big attempt to clean the stables. The Federation and the regional wings, they introduced a really strict cap on what these clubs can pay.
What are the numbers?
It's a limit of €4,500 taxable per season, plus a max bonus of €100 per point. But the crucial part isn't the number, it's the mechanism. No more cash.
Everything has to be bank transfers.
And every single contract has to be registered on a central digital platform. If the money isn't on the platform, legally, it just doesn't exist.
So they're trying to force the hobby back into being a hobby, or I guess force the professionals to actually declare themselves and pay tax.
Precisely. It offers legal certainty. If you stay under the cap, you're exempt from Social Security. But it completely disrupts that old patron model. You can't hand over a digital transfer from a suitcase.
This all leads to this idea of the social contract that was in the sources, because the clubs are now pushing back and they're saying, look, if you want us to be professional, you have to treat us like a real industry.
It's a fair point. The data shows football contributes €3.5 billion annually to the Belgian economy. It's a massive sector, and yet the infrastructure is just crumbling.
The stat that stood out to me was that Belgian stadiums are, on average, 30% older than in neighboring countries. That's a huge gap.
And building new ones is a nightmare. The sources say getting a building permit takes between 3.5 to 5 years. So you have this high-tech league structure we talked about being played in crumbling stadiums funded by black money, partly because the state makes it so hard to build a sustainable business model.
It's a really vicious cycle, and the volunteers are the ones who get caught right in the middle.
There are 80,000 volunteers keeping this whole system afloat, but they're burning out. The administrative burden of all these new transparency rules, it falls on them. It's hard to find a treasurer willing to work for free on a Sunday when the legal liability is going up and the paperwork is tripling.
So if we pull this all together, we have this incredible dichotomy. On one side, you've got the Jupiler Pro League, over-engineered, mathematically complex, designed for TV. And on the other side, the grassroots, historically fueled by envelopes of cash and local passion, now struggling to survive this transition to transparency.
It raises a really fundamental question about the nature of the sport in Belgium. The reforms are, objectively good. Transparency,